Martha, I heard a nice line today. Our bureau chief Michael came off the phone with you.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, Martha says, that has day-ruining potential.
I won't tell you exactly what has day-ruining potential.
No, we better not go there. But that's quite good. Homegrown phrase, British phrase, kind of thing you wouldn't hear in the United States.
Yeah. It's funny though, isn't it? Because we do have a lot of phrases which you only learn after you've said it that they don't say over here. So I was saying to my partner a couple of days ago, I said, oh, what did he have to say for himself then? He's like, what?
Yeah, but to be fair, the Americans, they've got a collection of their own that we do not use. I came into work today, and the security guard at the front door, now, she said to me, good morning, I'm so happy that you're here, which is like an upgrade on have a nice day.
Are you sure she didn't think you were David Blevins?
Well, there's every chance. But it did remind me of the old Billy Connolly gag. I'd rather be told to have a nice day by somebody who didn't mean it than be told to F off by somebody who did.
Very true.
I'm James Matthews in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Martha Kelner in Los Angeles, America's self-declared home of wellness.
I'm so glad you could be here with us, Martha.
I won't tell you to F off. I mentioned that it's the home of wellness because I've been spending some time investigating a new craze that's taken off here. It revolves around injecting peptides. Have you heard of peptides?
Is that the hims and hers thing?
It is, yeah, we'll get onto it. But they're basically tiny compounds that a growing number of people believe can transform their health.
Yeah, drugs for your hair, your weight, your everything. We'll look at their popularity and their peril. And where are we on the US-Iran war? We were expecting peace talks, but the Americans, well, they were left hanging on the telephone. Trump has now extended the ceasefire.
And the fallout from that conflict being felt far and wide. Here in California, an Iranian woman has been arrested, accused of trafficking arms to Sudan on behalf of Tehran. I've been speaking to Donald Trump's hand-picked attorney in Los Angeles County, the man responsible for bringing this case.
And we'll bring you the Bible according to Donald Trump. Yeah, you heard that right. Well, he's reading a passage, at least. God's message to Solomon is given the ultimate voiceover.
Yeah, I do sometimes wonder if I'm going a bit too LA. I have to explain to my family back in Wakefield that I've taken up matcha drinking, hiking. Last night I went to this fitness class and you would laugh if you saw me. It's very culty. I can't quite explain.
You had me at matcha.
I'd love to see you in this fitness class, James.
Wouldn't want to rip my tights, Martha.
Anyway, I can't quite describe it in my own words, so I went to their website for a bit of help, and this class is described as music-driven somatic practice, blending breath, movement and sound to create space in the body and mind.
Who needs peptides?
Exactly. But peptides is the latest wellness fad that I've been looking into, and I'm not sure I'm up for it just yet. It involves essentially injectables, which are called peptides. I didn't have a clue what they were until a couple of months ago. So I met up with one of the world's main peptide influencers. They are a thing now. A guy called Jacob Natchinson, who describes himself as a human pincushion, describes himself as a living, breathing science experiment.
But right now I'm doing Penialon, Epitalon, HCG, Retatrutide, very popular on the internet right now, Wolverine blend, which is BPC 157, TB 500, NAD+.
Did he say, Martha, Wolverine blend?
He certainly did.
And is he injecting that?
Yeah, that is one of the things that he's injecting. I watched him do his morning routine. He takes a handful, quite literally, a handful of 20 different pills, which are supplements. He then does one injection after the other of various types of peptide. He was doing 6 on the morning that I met him, but he said a couple of weeks ago he was doing 12 injections every morning, sometimes injections in the evening as well. And these peptides are short-chain amino acids. When injected, they stimulate the body's natural processes, but in a synthetic way. And the people who are using them believe that they're going to make them live longer, that they're going to make them look more beautiful, be stronger, lose weight. They promise the world, and it's something that's been propelled right to at the top of the news agenda by the Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., because he is such a big fan of peptides too.
And RFK Jr., Martha, he wants to loosen the regulations on peptides, yeah?
Yeah, RFK Jr. went on the Joe Rogan podcast, said, he is a big fan of peptides, loves them. Joe Rogan also said that he'd been using a type of peptide which had helped heal a long-standing injury that he had. And, it's not just talk. RFK Jr. is now really pushing the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration over here, the regulator. He's pushing them to ask them to allow compounding pharmacies to produce more than a dozen injectable peptides, which have previously been banned because they've been deemed to have potentially significant safety risks. So the peptides previously hadn't been approved by the FDA as safe or effective. The FDA had also noted that they were increasingly being marketed with unproved claims that they had these, cosmetic, anti-aging, disease-fighting benefits. But peptides are very popular with the Make America Healthy Again brigade, which is being headed by RFK Jr. And it's been described by some people as sort of bro science taking over.
I've seen your reporting on this, Martha. I tell you, one thing that surprised me is just how commonplace it seems to be now. You went into a gym and it seemed to me that everybody you spoke to was using them.
Yeah, it's gone mainstream fast, and faster than a lot of scientists, biologists would have liked it to, because they think that people are putting their health at risk. But yeah, I went into this gym in Tampa, Florida, and spoke to, a lot of people, just went up to them with the microphone and said, we're doing a piece on peptides. Are you taking them? And the amount of people who just, listed the different forms of peptides, words that I'd never even heard of, formulas that I'd not heard of. And I spoke to one guy who said, that he'd estimate that in that gym, at least 60% of the people there are on peptides.
Wow.
It's borne out by that theory, by speaking to some of my friends here. They say, what are you working on this week? And I said, I'm working on a piece about peptides. And one of my female friends said, oh yeah, I've been injecting NAD+ every day for the last 6 months. And she swears by it. And, I said, are you not concerned? Because when I was watching that Jacob guy inject again and again and again, and I was thinking, there've been no long-term studies on the human body to, suggest that this is safe in the long run. And, I spoke to a professor, Paul Knopfler, who works for the University of California, Davis, and he was saying, he worries that RFK Jr.'s push to get these peptides off the banned list, to expand access to them, is actually being dictated by RFK Jr.'s own personal ideology. And he's concerned that, in 5-10 years, people could have liver, kidney damage, even cancer from doing these peptides.
And is it right, Martha, that it's a full-blown industry, big money to be made?
Yeah, it's definitely a growing industry. I met a guy called Sean who runs a website here in the US called Peptide Hackers. They're actually based in Los Angeles. He was very careful to point out, both in his website and in person when I met him, that he only sells these peptides for scientific research and not for human use. But they are, very expensive products. And wherever, people are getting them from, it's very clear from looking at social media, especially TikTok, that there are a huge number of young people who are using peptides as a kind of cheat code, really, this fast track way to reaching their ideal appearance. And it is a lot of it motivated by looks. They want to lose weight, they want to gain muscle and grow their hair, whatever it is.
Yeah, on the figures, Martha, I was looking at one company, Hims and Hers, purely for research, I stress. It offers weight loss jabs. Their products, I see, range from $149 to $1,899 per month. And their stocks have surged more than 125%. since February. So not for the first time there's a Trump policy making somebody rich.
James, we've been on the lookout for whether these talks are going to happen in Islamabad. And today we do have some movement on the US-Iran conflict.
Yeah, quite significant movement, Martha. I have to say the day started quite early. Half of Washington was expecting the sight of J.D. Vance jumping on a plane along with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner to go to Pakistan to begin these negotiations. But that didn't happen. Didn't happen early morning, didn't happen mid-morning. We waited and until eventually all three ended up in the White House for what we were told were policy meetings. You know, Vance was there, Secretary of State Marco Rubio joined as well. So it was clear something had come unstuck. And what it was the Iranians who left the Americans hanging by the telephone. We had statements out of Tehran saying that they were unhappy with what they reckoned were mixed messages from the Americans. It became clear that they weren't going to attend negotiations and that the Americans would be stood up. So Vance didn't get on the plane. And early evening, we had a Truth Social post from Donald Trump. Somebody had to blink. And for me, Martha, this is Trump doing exactly that.
Yeah, he wrote on Truth Social saying, based on the fact that the government of Iran is seriously fractured, not unexpectedly so, and upon the request of Field Marshal Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif of Pakistan, we've been asked to hold our attack on the country of Iran until such a time as their leaders and representatives can come up with a unified proposal. I've therefore directed our military to continue the blockade and in all other respects remain ready and able, and will therefore extend the ceasefire until such a time as their proposal is submitted and discussions are concluded one way or the other. Signs it off President Donald J. Trump.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that deadline, the ceasefire, was going to run out on Wednesday evening, although the Pakistanis, they were saying it actually kicked in this evening. So there was confusion over that for a kickoff. Reading that Truth Social post, for me, it has Donald Trump's failure written all over it. He speaks about the fracture, a not unexpected fracture of the government of Iran. Well, it's the Americans and the Israelis who fractured that government, who removed the top tier, left themselves effectively with nobody with the authority to negotiate. And I think that's what's behind the lack of a unified proposal. Donald Trump, he speaks about extending the ceasefire. The question there is, well, how far does that extend? What does he want from the Iranians that he's not getting at the moment? And how does this all square with the stated views of the war? You know, Donald Trump, he spoke about removing Iran's nuclear threat, removing its ballistic missile capability, stopping its aid to proxies and so on. Earlier on, he was talking about regime change, coming to the help of Iranian protesters in the streets. None of that has been achieved. And yet here we are in a situation where we have an indefinite ceasefire. Who knows, could be months. And of course, the Strait of Hormuz, the vulnerability that Donald Trump didn't know he had before this started, that remains choked. Iran has a control over that. So this president, who has continually spoken about total victory, is somewhat humiliated, I think, by an Iran, you know, we've seen that this is a country that can take a punch, and it sees his weakness and continues to play on it, I think.
Yeah, I wonder whether he was trying to force the Iranians' hand by saying that J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were, heading out to Islamabad for these peace talks, thinking that the Iranians would just fall in line. You know, we expected them to be on the plane on Sunday night, and then we were expecting them to be on the plane on Monday and then Tuesday, and it's just not happened. And the US have ended up looking weak because of it. You know, it's given Iran the edge again.
Yeah, things did look promising. You know, J.D. Vance, he was the person that the Iranians wanted to deal with because he has the ear of the president. He's a man with proximity to the commander-in-chief. And he's also not Witkoff and Kushner. The Iranians didn't trust that pair because it was during their negotiations that things all kicked off in the first instance. There was a suspicion that if it was Witkoff and Kushner on the plane only, then that might be a cover for further military action. So things seem to be set fair for a solution. But ultimately, it's a question of who the Americans can trust. You know, they don't have regime change. They have a reshuffle. There is a more hardline IRGC in place. And it's unclear who holds sway between the politicians and the Revolutionary Guard. So it is a mess, and it is a mess largely of Donald Trump's making. It's certainly not the success that he would wish to portray. Martha, there's another story in your part of the United States capturing global attention, yeah?
Yeah, very much linked to the Iran conflict. A 44-year-old Iranian woman was arrested at Los Angeles airport over the weekend for allegedly trafficking millions of dollars of weapons and ammunition from Iran to Sudan. And it's a fascinating story because she was living this affluent life in a quiet upmarket suburb of LA, and her neighbours had no idea that they were living next to an alleged international major arms dealer. You know, she faces 20 years in jail if she's convicted of these crimes.
Yeah, we know quite a bit about her now, don't we? Shamim Mafi, a controversial character handpicked by Donald Trump. And as always with immigration stories in this country, there is a political element to it. You've been looking into the story, Martha.
Yeah, I interviewed Bill O'Saley today after he posted about Shamim Mafi's arrest on X. He revealed a lot of personal details about her and how exactly the operation unfolded.
We have information because of the LA attorney Bill O'Saley, who's been on the case.
He told me that Mafi first came onto his radar a year ago. He said he found highly incriminating information about her, which then led to this lengthy investigation. I asked him about her background and how she came to be in the US.
She immigrated to the United States back about over 10 years ago. She came in under a refugee status, claiming that she was being persecuted by the government of Iran. That's how she made entry into the country, taking advantage of the asylum process here, which has frankly been heavily abused. And then shortly thereafter, in 2016, she received a green card or a legal permanent residency. So I guess at that time, I wasn't part of the government there, but I don't know whether any vetting or checking went into place. So I'm not really sure what happened there. She popped up on my radar last year when information was brought to my attention. And we went ahead and executed some search warrants because there was some suspicion that she was actually aiding the government of Iran, the regime there. So we executed those search warrants late last summer. We found some highly incriminating information that she was, in fact, trafficking arms on behalf of the Iranian regime. And not just some arms, a lot of arms. Tens of millions of dollars of transactions of weapons to the government of Sudan from Iran. And we've been building the case, and she had returned to the United States earlier this year. And obviously we've been tracking her whereabouts, and she was getting ready to depart the United States again last Saturday. She booked a ticket to Turkey, and she was getting ready to fly to Istanbul. And so we went ahead and made the decision at that point that we had enough evidence to bring charges. And so we presented the evidence to a judge on Saturday. The judge issued the arrest warrant, and we arrested her at Los Angeles International Airport Saturday night.
O'Saley is a big Donald Trump guy, and as you might expect, he's blaming Biden-era policies for Mafi being allowed to remain in the country. But there's no doubt about it, you know, some solid investigative work has gone into this complaint, and the account that they have detailed in this document of her operation seems to show how Iran has built up a treasury of weapons, selling the same drone technology to Sudan that they've been using themselves to retaliate on Gulf countries over the last several weeks for the war that was started by America and Israel. So it's a very interesting case. And she'll be back in court again on Monday.
Great stuff, Martha. And we can all watch your reporting on that story on all Sky News platforms later this week.
James, Donald Trump has obviously emerged as the king of trolling online, but he's getting a bit of a taste of his own medicine, isn't he? From an unexpected source.
Yeah, he's got a few challengers on that one these days, hasn't he? And from the Iranians in particular, clearly fans of contemporary British culture, or certainly from the 90s or whenever Mr. Bean was big, because there is a new Mr. Bean meme featuring J.D. Vance. It's kind of, the Mr. Bean figure with J.D. Vance's head waiting by the side of the road, a deserted road for a lift somewhere. Yeah. Clearly, it's taking the mickey out of him waiting in the White House, waiting to get on a plane to Pakistan today.
Yeah.
Not today, Mr. Vance, was the gag.
They've put quite a bit of money into this, though, haven't they, their social media strategy? Because they've got these videos of Lego figurines, which are very well produced. And I did wonder whether they might have got inspiration from our Sky News cameraman, Ed Young, who himself did a sketch on Donald Trump with Lego figurines during the original demolition of part of the White House to build the ballroom. Ed did this Lego video, and they've done similar.
That's right, yeah. And I can tell you, Martha, the award-winning Lego video, or the model for it, still occupies space in the Washington Bureau. Nobody dare touch it. But these Iranian-produced Lego movies, they're everything you want when you're trolling, aren't they? They're cool, funny, and just great production values.
Yeah, they've got the president as a Lego man, huge teeth, swinging his golf clubs, other Lego men surrounding him in this big ballroom, raising a glass to him. They're obviously observing him pretty closely.
Yeah, it looks trivial, but part of the broader strategy, isn't it? Digital pressure layered on top of, the military and diplomatic pressure. And, Trump won't like it. Social media, that's the forum where Donald Trump goes into battle. And, those kind of images, it can be hard to fight against.
Yeah, he hates people taking the piss out of him, which incidentally is another phrase which Americans don't know. But he does. He hates being mocked.
I don't know what the Americans would say to that. I think you're grinding his gears, Martha.
I'm going to go away and as Trump 100 homework, I'm going to ask an American what they say for taking the piss, and I'll come back with the answer.
Yeah, good luck with that one. Finally, Martha, it's Tuesday, it's 6 o'clock, and we're not the only ones broadcasting at this time of the evening, are we?
We're certainly not. Donald Trump is currently reading the Bible in what's been labelled as a marathon event. This is all to mark the 250th anniversary of the United States, and the point of it is that it will, in their eyes, encourage a return to the spiritual foundation that has shaped our country.
Yeah, Martha, I think the political point for the president is to mend fences with the evangelical right. This a man, of course, who has fallen out with the Pope, refused to apologise, has published AI-generated social media pictures depicting him as Jesus healing a sick person. So he's a man, some would say, in need of redemption. But interestingly, that passage that he reads, it's God's message to Solomon after he'd finished building his father David's temple, which incidentally was a temple dripping with gold. It's a message that he should humble himself if he wants his prayers heard. So I'll let you be the judge of how appropriate that particular passage was. But one thing it is controversial because it's the very scripture that was read by one of Donald Trump's supporters during the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah, I'm not sure whether Pope Leo will be sitting and watching the whole thing, but who knows?
Martha, before we go, we need to make a formal Trump 100 apology to, Nancy Reagan. Oh. Because listeners to yesterday's episode will know that I said Zammo Maguire. Do you know who Zammo Maguire is?
Is he related to Lizzie McGuire?
No, I know you don't know who Zamo Maguire because I'm looking at our text exchange. I say, do you know who Zamo Maguire is? You say, is he related to Lizzie McGuire? I say, who's Lizzie McGuire? Then you say, do you know Hilary Duff? I said, no, who's that? You say, she's Lizzie McGuire. Anyway, so Zamo is from Grange Hill, and he's most famous for the Just Say No, the anti-drugs campaign on that show. I said that he came up with the Just Say No campaign ahead of Nancy Reagan, First Lady, one-time First Lady. In fact, it was the bold Nancy whose idea it was. She didn't nick it from a kids' TV programme in the UK in the 1980s. Sorry, Nancy.
That's genuinely hilarious. Poor old Nancy.
Yeah, if you're a friend of Nancy's, or indeed if you are not and just want to get in touch, do email us to the usual place, trump100@sky.uk.
Yeah, on that note, thank you ever so much for listening. And trump100@sky.uk is the email, as ever, if you have a question or a comment or a complaint.
Yeah, we're back on Friday. See you then.
See you soon.